In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It is 100% real. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Curious Dimension podcast, where we explore the mysteries of the unknown, delve into the fascinating world of UFO disclosure, sacred geometry, crop circles, and more. I am your host, Matt Barone. I hope that you've been enjoying the conversations as much as I have been hosting them. Don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps us reach more curious minds like yours. And if you want to stay updated with all of our latest episodes, be sure to hammer that subscribe button. You won't want to miss any of the exciting discussions we have lined up. Finally, we love hearing from you. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's episode or any questions you might have. Your feedback means the world to me and helps shape future content. Today, we have part 2 of my conversation with author, experiencer, and healer Lisa Nelson. In this podcast episode, Lisa continues to share her compelling experiences with extraterrestrial encounters linked to the 59th Street UFO event that was witnessed by multiple people. Lisa narrates her relationship with Rob, her late husband, from their meeting in 8th grade through various intriguing and tragic incidents involving alleged alien abductions, communications through telephonic technologies, and Rob's purported work with extraterrestrial beings due to his high intellect. I want to reiterate what I said in the previous intro with part 1 with Lisa. That is, some of the information that we talk about can be corroborated and other parts cannot be corroborated. Also, it is important to note that the very well-respected UFO researcher Robert Hastings edited Lisa's book and also wrote the epilogue. I will say that the conclusions that Robert Hastings draws about Lisa is the same that I have come to, and that she's a very honest and sincere person. I think Lisa's story is an important piece to the UFO conversation. So without further ado, let's welcome back Lisa Nelson. Lisa, it's so great to have you back with us for the second part. For anybody that hasn't watched part 1, I highly recommend you go back and listen to our conversation and get a pretty good understanding of Lisa's story. Today, we're going to pick up where we left off. We were speaking about the 59th Street UFO event that you write about in your book, which is one out of many things that happened in the book. It's a story that goes back to you at an early age and goes through college to your working life. We're going to dive a little deeper into Rob, your late husband's experiences, because he's really the main focus of the book. So do you want to pick up where we left off with Rob and where we were going to go?
Sure. Do you want a little background summary?
Yes.
I had met him in 8th grade and developed a crush on the new kid in town who was, to my thinking, the most beautiful boy I'd ever seen. Platinum blonde, blue-eyed, tall, athletic build, popular, super smart, very mature for his age. Pined for this guy for a couple years before I realized I should give up on that. He's too popular. By sophomore year, I had bloomed a bit, and he noticed me, and we started dating. Wonderful thing happening. He began to open up to me and reveal himself as a tragic figure. During one walk, early winter began. It was snowing that night, and he seemed very sad. And he told me that he had been contacted by beings or aliens that were planning to come get him for a meeting. He told me that his parents had been abducted when he was a small boy and that the car had stalled on the road. They were accosted by very large overhead lights. Blindingly, his father got out of the car to try to see what was going on. He disappeared. His mother got out of the car. She disappeared, was left in this abandoned car and later adopted by the family he was with. So that was something he was expressing that was very much troubling him because he said that he had never seen his parents again. So there was this abduction story and the loss of family. His family always teased him that he wasn't one of them, and he looked very different from the family. So I asked curiously, how did they contact you? Like, how does an alien tell you all this stuff? And he said, on the telephone. And That was very curious, but later I did see, many years later, Christopher O'Brien suggested I watch The Mothman Prophecies, and that is a movie where they describe the use of telephone technology to communicate with people, even in instances where there is actually no telephonic connection. But it
Maybe we
seems
should, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but maybe we should explain to people, John Keel wrote that, and I think it's based off of actual events, The Mothman Prophecies. Is that correct?
I understand it to be a true story and that there were warnings given and disasters which occurred, and there have been warnings. And there was use of the telephone to communicate with people. I think the beings will use things that we can understand as a vehicle, because if they just did it telepathically, it might be instantly dismissed as, where'd that come from? That's not my normal thought. That's some weird fantasy. We do that quite a bit, and that's why a lot of people don't understand their intuition as much, because we tend to dismiss without three-dimensional validation. But there was this night where he was telling me that he was going to be picked up by a craft. He said, "Please pray for me. I'm really scared." I looked out the window all night and saw nothing. I stayed up until really late, and in high school, you need your sleep. So the next day I was like, I don't know what you were talking about. So began my skepticism and wondering if my dream guy was really a nut. I took a watchful eye to anything he said after that. He said that what happened was they picked him up. He was instantly from his room into a craft, and they talked to him and said that they wanted something from him and that he was going to start working with him. Now, Rob had a 186 IQ. His father confirmed that to me, and they had taken him to a psychologist at points in time because he was such a voracious consumer of information. He read everything far beyond his years. In that sense, he could really wiggle out of any situation with any adult because his intellect was very sharp and he could see what they were doing. There were a couple of times where his parents took him for evaluation and the professional could not make any sort of diagnosis with him because he would flip the roles and control the session and ask all the questions rather than answer questions. So he was very clever. Because of his intelligence, they wanted to work with him. All through the 15 years of continuous contact, they would talk about working on calculations. Sometimes he would sit with laser focus and draw things in his notebook. They would sometimes look very angular or look very formulaic and nothing that made sense to my eyes. Sometimes his brother's eyes would have drawing contests to see who could come up with the most advanced craft. As competitive brothers between the 5 boys, sometimes they would go at it. The 4th brother was a very fine artist, and the youngest one, Michael, my dear remaining brother, would be the judge, like who did the most advanced design, and Rob would always explain why his design was more advanced. So he was very into aeronautics. He was always reading the periodicals when we were in college, looking into the developments, especially on the X-29, which was a very big focus for the Guardians during those years. They were looking for it to achieve acuity with the wing design. It was a craft that had forward swept wings. The attitude of it was meant to give it unrivaled maneuverability, and they never did achieve what they believed the craft was potentially capable of doing. If you read the interview with RF, an engineer for Skunk Works, he said that there was a great deal of work done on that craft and they never did achieve the maneuverability they were looking. But they were almost, if I understand RF correctly, looking to do right angle turns, trying to get that sort of maneuverability where you've got going straight and then left or right, turning on a dime. There was always talk from the Guardians, the holograms that would update me on things, and then Rob's activities with his laser focus, where he would tune me out for days, scratching in his notebook, programming computers. And another thing that occurred was the holograms that would replace him when he was said to be, or allegedly, Rob, as I was taught to use by my editor, Rob Hastings. Every hologram had a more advanced iteration to it. In the beginning, they were very rough and rudimentary. I was once asked if we got the idea for number 2 from Terminator, and I said there were similarities, but Terminator didn't come for many years later.
Mm-hmm.
It was long before those movies.
Something we outlined in the first podcast. A lot of the information you're getting from him, people would speculate, oh, he just watched Close Encounters, Star Wars, whatever, but those movies didn't come out till many years later. So
That's right.
very interesting point. Anyway, keep going. This is fascinating. I think you're doing a good job of building this personality that was your late husband. So right now we're in high school and he's telling you these things, and then you're witness to several events with him. Can we talk a little bit about when there would be a walk-in situation where one of these holograms would come in and he would go? What made you think that this was really happening? Because when you hear this at first, it's very difficult to understand, but there were very specific things that you witnessed with him that would lead you to believe something very strange is happening. Hey guys, I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all for tuning in. If you're enjoying this episode and want to help us uncover more mysteries of the universe, don't forget to support Curious Dimension. If you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit the like button. It really helps get this content in front of more people who are curious just like you. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode. Don't forget to click that notification bell too, so you're the first to know when we release new content. For those of you listening on your favorite podcast platform, make sure to follow or subscribe to the show and leave us a rating and review. It helps more than you know. And whether you're watching or listening, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below or send me a message. Thanks for being part of the Curious Dimension community. Your support keeps this journey going.
The first situation was the instance of my diaries vanishing from my home, where I received a phone call in a very terse Rob voice saying, "Do you know where your diaries are? We told you not to write that stuff down." I ran to my room and discovered that my diaries were not in my hiding place. I looked under my sister's bed as well, suspecting maybe she was messing around in my private stuff because we shared a room. But my diaries were not in the house. I got yelled at for writing things down because they told me I could end up being taken away by the government because they were very interested in people who knew things. I was listening to Rob's voice giving me a hard time about it, and they hung up on me after telling me I needed to shape up or ship out kind of thing. I tried to call back to the Barclay house immediately, and the phone was busy. Called one more time, phone's still busy, so I ran out the door to run over to his house, which would take me several minutes. As I came out the door, he was almost approaching my house, and I realized that he could not have been on the phone. I was on the phone with a voice while he was outside somewhere between his house and my house because he was on the outskirts of our neighborhood. So that stunned me. Another event that let me know that something strange was going on is when I heard helicopters in the night approaching our house in an obvious formation because it was quite a rumbling that was approaching from a distance. And it was so loud that it woke me up, and I was aware. My thoughts were, I'm asleep, but awake. I remember those words in particular. And why isn't Mom and Dad waking up? Why doesn't anybody wake up? How come only I'm awake? I recall getting out of my bed in a rather trance-like state and walking into the living room and seeing the lights not only streaming through my bedroom window, but through the little decorative door windows. In the front door, we had picture windows, and they were completely lit. And I ended up on the front yard looking above me at about higher than ceiling height. There was a craft that was so vast I could not see the end of it, which extended beyond our across the street neighbor's backyard, which was a long, deep backyard. It had to be larger than a football stadium. As soon as I had come out the front door, the formation left, and I was left with this very gentle hum, almost comforting. I wonder if that was a calming thing that had placed me into a serenity. Suddenly, I was kneeling inside a craft on a curved surface, saucer-like, looking down at my front yard and noticing details of the roof and the yard, not quite realizing that I was inside a craft until a tall being said, "Hey, turn around." As I did so, the transparent curvature of the saucer shape turned metallic, and I'm sitting on the floor now on my tush and seeing a very tall being who is presenting a very assuring, smiling gesture towards me and begins to speak to me telepathically. I notice that its mouth does not move. It asked me to stand up, which I did with ease. It says, "We want to ask you something." And I felt a sorting through my mind, much as if you were to spin a Rolodex or someone flipping through files. I struggled with that because I didn't want anyone going into my mind and said, "Hey, let me give you the answer." And they projected to me, "No, you'll convolute the answer. Look at it." And they said, "Okay, we're good now. Come over to this table." When I had first arrived there, I had noticed a console and got very fascinated with that. As soon as I started to take it in and thought to myself, let me remember this, a silver opaque partition formed, preventing me from looking at that. They asked me to walk to the left into more of an open space. A tabletop formed, much like a desk without actual legs on it.
I think we talked a little bit about some of the episodes that happened with Rob. I'm trying to decide which way I want to go with this. I want to save some time at the end to talk a little about the current state of disclosure. Could we fast forward to New York when Rob started to deteriorate a little bit, your late husband, and he was allegedly shot in the head? So could you give a quick background of him starting to deteriorate while you guys are living in New York? Maybe we could go from the elevator event when you were getting away, maybe a quick background on him starting to deteriorate, you getting away from him, and then let's go to that elevator event, because I think that's where they tell you he was shot, correct?
They tell me on the telephone, so I was very hostile to the phone call. But I can run through that quickly.
Okay.
If I start from the point where we graduate from college, get married, and move to New York in a smooth summer, that's where we make a break with the Guardians, and that's where his deterioration really began.
I want to just frame this for everybody, because after high school, prior to high school, during high school, you have to understand that this man is living like this very busy life. He's doing martial arts. He's playing sports all year long. He has a girlfriend. He's got a lot going on. And then he's also allegedly having these contacts with extraterrestrial beings. His life is fulfilled. He's waking up tired some days. He's got a lot going on. Fast forward after college, and then you guys getting married, all of this sort of just stops. And so you could see how someone could lose their way very quickly. And this is the beginning of the downfall of your late husband. And he gets involved in some things that are obviously not good. Do you want to take us from there?
Yes. After we were married, I was very insistent that we have a normal life. I wanted to get away from the Guardians, and he agreed to it. As soon as we were married, that was supposed to be the end of the Guardian contact. I insisted on this during college as well, and there were very infrequent contacts where maybe there were other sorts of visitors in his form. But for the most part, contact was limited to him doing calculations during college and having the continued interest in technology development. When we got married, we were on our own and we were going to get jobs. I got a job. That's where I met Christopher O'Brien. He was my first friend in New York. Rob was not launching. He seemed to be tired all the time. His vitality seemed to be changing. We were beginning to have stress around his contribution to the household finances. Paying the bills fell on me. There was beginning to be stress because I didn't understand why he wasn't getting gainful employment, especially for someone so intelligent. There were a couple of years where he had some jobs that didn't seem to last very long. And there also seemed to be days where he just couldn't get out of bed. So I started to wonder if there was depression. I started to ask him to look into maybe getting some medical care. He was very resistant to that. And the more I insisted, the more stress came between us. Eventually, he finally admitted when I was reaching a breaking point that I could not support us by myself. I was still on an entry-level salary. He admitted that he was having memory loss and sometimes getting lost. And that was why he was losing his jobs, and they were more like temporary situations because he couldn't follow through on his duties. So we began to get into disagreements about medical care. He would avoid it, saying that if he were to get into the healthcare system, they would notice things different about him that would raise flags. He also began to talk about being involved in an organization he referred to as Democracy, a group very concerned with the crack scourge of the time. We got to New York in 1983, and crack was a big problem. It had deterred trust in law enforcement because there were police personnel who were playing both sides of the fence. Some were taking money to protect drug cartels. Some of them were robbing the drug dealers, taking the drugs and selling them themselves. And then, according to Rob, he was involved in some good guys who were involved in fighting crack. I demanded that he not be involved in that because vigilantism was going to extremes in New York City at the time. Individual actors would go after people they deemed to be lawless, and that was illegal. There were a lot of studies about corruption in the police department. Confidence in law enforcement was so low that there was a large organization heralded as heroes. The leaders actually lived directly across the street from us, and that was the Guardian Angels. They wore uniforms. They would wear red berets so you could easily see them, and they almost marched in troops and would patrol the subways, and people were glad for it because they felt like they weren't being protected by law enforcement. But Rob would tell me that he was in something big and something important, and he was used to doing missions before. Eventually, he gradually revealed to me that he was very ill and that he was going to die. At first, I was skeptical that maybe he was appealing to my sympathies because I had been giving him a hard time about employment and bringing money into the household, and I was becoming stressed between having the responsibility of the bill paying to myself. Fortunately, I ended up working for a company that managed recording artists, and it paid very well, and I was making ends meet. But it was very stressful at home because as he got sicker, I began to see that he was indeed very ill. Sometimes when I threatened to break up with him, there would be two situations, one of my concern for his well-being and also concern about the presence of this Democracy group because there were members who were letting me know that they knew who I was by intimidating me on a street corner. For example, someone would be wearing double plaid, one type of plaid and another type of plaid, and maybe have shaved heads. They were pretty street-looking guys if they were cops, but they were letting me know, like, we got eyes on you. He showed me that there was someone in the apartment building across the courtyard from us that would signal to Rob, and Rob would signal back, and that there was communication going on with someone across the courtyard who was looking into our apartment. And there was one time I confided in a record producer who I had got to know through my first job at Harvey. He had become a caring friend, a big brother figure in my life, and I would play violin in his recording studio at times. I was talking to him on the telephone, and about 4 days later, Rob came in home in a fury, holding a cassette tape, and smashed it on the floor in his rage and said, "You talked about us to your friend? How could you do that? Now we've got real problems." I was terrified of his rage at the time. And obviously, they had a means of recording my conversation, whoever they were, the democracy organization. So I knew that they had means to do things that I didn't believe Rob would have the means to do on his own, because how do you record a telephone? Sort of
Right.
a
In this year of the mid 80s.
in the 1984, maybe 85 by then. I began to isolate myself somewhat and just resorted to working my really great job in the entertainment business, working with these very popular recording artists that were filling stadiums around the world. They kept me pretty busy, and I resorted to being very busy in my career, which did help financially because I got promotions and raise after raise. And he began to become angry about how unavailable I was. As his illness advanced, he began to have seizures. I knew that he was very ill and that it was a neurological disorder. The arguments about medical care continued because I care a lot about people's health, which is why I've become a healer. He claimed he was getting whatever care he could get through democracy because there were people from all walks of life in this organization. He said there was no point in going to the hospital because there wasn't much of anything they could do for anyone having a seizure other waiting for the one that ended it all. So we went into a phase of being very much around tending to his seizures. I would get a phone call at work and I'd say, "Hey, boss, I got to go home real fast." And he'd say, "Do what you got to do. I understand." My boss was a wonderful, caring person and he treated us like family. So I rushed home many times to tend to him during seizures, watch his tongue, make sure that he was breathing. It became a very sad time of life because I was quite certain that I was going to lose this man. Were prodrome symptoms where he would seem depressed and then he would become agitated. He was very likely to pick a fight with me, and I would do my very best not to get involved in the fight, but it would sometimes escalate to violence. There was a point in time where things really escalated because I had become a spiritual seeker and had gotten involved in a school of mysteries, which was a very wonderful time for me. And it opened my intuition and knowledge of what is capable within the scope of human intuition and the healing arts. Rob was very unhappy about that. I came home one night and he was furious with me. He became very violent and I was nearly chopped up in my futon. I prayed for spiritual protection while he chopped up the bed I was laying in, and I did not get hurt. But he began to have the symptoms of this oncoming seizure, which was often it was rage, then vomiting, then collapse, then the seizure. And I knew this pattern, but when he had nearly chopped me up, I decided to get out of the apartment and disappeared. I knew this would be a problem because I had been threatened that if I ever left him, I would have a problem because I knew too much. Robert told me too much about this group. I went into hiding, asked the receptionist to screen calls and not let Rob get through. He called incessantly for a day, probably about 40 times, and the receptionist blocked him from getting through. He did get one call in where he told me that democracy was after him, they were after me, and that I needed to go home or I was gonna have some real serious safety problems. So I was very afraid. I did not go home, and I knew that I needed to stay somewhere where nobody knew where I was. A colleague helped me get a condominium that a friend of his owned that was up for sale. They gave me the keys to it and said, you can stay here for a week while you get a place to stay. And I was very grateful for that. One evening, I had an apparition communicate with me. It looked like shimmering water in the sunlight that hovered over me for about 20 minutes. And it was burningly bright and did not light the room. It was a light being that assured me I was going to be okay. There was another situation where I decided to have a date with a gentleman that had been treating me to dinner about once a week to make me feel better. And there was romantic interest there. Decided that I really was broken up with Rob for real, and I invited him. We celebrated his birthday. I took him out for his birthday, invited him to stay with me at the condo. He was unable to be intimate with me because he had a back issue, a wrestling injury from his younger years. We just held one another and enjoyed one another's company. I believed that I was in a completely private setting. Another night I was coming home, or I was at the office. The calls from Rob had stopped for a full day, and then one day I picked up my phone, and it was Rob's voice on the phone saying, "This is the Guardians. Rob is dead. You are in big trouble. You need to work with us or they're going to get you. And we need you to work with us because they threw his body in the East River and we fished his body out. We repaired the body and we need you to raise the re-energized Rob." Tomar was his alternate name.
Okay. This phone call comes in Rob's voice. It's the Guardians, these ETs that are communicating through him. It's important to state that there had been zero interaction with him doing this or the ETs. There was no interaction for several years since college,
right.
correct?
That since we got married, right after we got out of college, we had cut interaction down to nothing. I was even skeptical that it was the Guardians. I thought he had slipped through the reception desk, but they told me. I yelled at him, "Rob, I'm not coming back. I'm never coming back. You nearly killed me. It's who's going to get me, democracy or you? I'm not coming back." They said, "You don't believe this is the Guardians? Look at your telephone console." There were no lights lit up on the console where I could see anybody on the telephone in the whole entire office. The only light lit up was the light between my boss's desk to my desk, which was a tie line. It did not have outside access whatsoever. And that floored me because I couldn't imagine Rob getting through a telephone system that was set up as a network. Most of the lines did have outside access, but that line did not have outside access.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually checked my boss's office. He was not on the telephone. I knew that something big was happening. They said, "You need to decide if you're going to help us. We're not going to help you unless you help us." I was very afraid. I was yelling. I was screaming quite a bit. Everything in the office just came to a standstill because of all the yelling I was doing. I was accusing them of being Rob. They were telling me things that were frightening me and flooring me at the same time. They said, "We'll be in touch with you the next day. We will prove to you that Rob is dead." They hung up, and I was just shocked because I hadn't heard from them in years. We had been married a few years by then. This was January of 1987. We were married in 1983, about 3.5 years. I was sitting there stunned. Everybody was just quiet as a mouse because I had created this big. One phone call comes in and the receptionist says, "Friend Christopher." I went, "Oh my God, what timing." I picked up the phone and he said, "Lise, I don't know what came over me, but I suddenly had this unbelievable compulsion to call you. What's going on?" This is Christopher O'Brien, the paranormal researcher, and he happened to show up at the most timely moment. Seemingly, we cannot explain the compulsion that came over him. we wondered if it had been prompted in some way by the beings. I hadn't heard from him in 6 months, not because of any falling out, but I was that busy and also keeping to myself because he'd always ask me, "Are you sure you're okay? You seem like you got something going on." And I'd be like, "No, just things are stressful at home. Rob's not working."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Chris, something really upsetting has happened. I've been contacted. I don't know who it is for sure. I don't know what to do." And he said, "Come to my house tonight. I'll do a reading for you." He was at the time a professional tarot reader. So that evening, I did end up going to his house. His girlfriend was very kind about letting me in late at night. I had an obligation that evening, so I came pretty late at night. And he did a reading for me. I didn't know the first thing about tarot. It was the first time I'd ever actually seen any of the tarot cards. But he said, "This will give us some information, and let's look into what is contacting you and what's going on here." And he started to draw cards, and I hadn't told him very much. They want to talk to me. I've been threatened. I'm scared. And he pulled a death card. He pulled a card that showed a blonde man with a new life. And every time he pulled a card, he was stunned and said, "My God, Lisa, you're in a lot of trouble." And I said, "Yeah, I might be in a lot of trouble." Anyway, I left his home and went back to the condo, very frightened, and thought about things. But I knew from the cards that the death card was letting me know that Rob had, in fact, been killed, which was very frightening for me. But also maybe that my troubles at home might have sadly resolved. And that blonde man and new life, if they rejuvenated Rob, that would be a blonde man, and that would be a new life because it would be a regenerated being. But I was having a very hard time getting my head wrapped around regenerating a repaired body and that my husband was dead. And I couldn't imagine how they could possibly prove to me that he was dead because everything I had ever seen was in the shape of Rob, whether it was other worldly visitors. 4 of them had come in his appearance. The holograms were always in his appearance, and there had been at least 15 of them. The guardians were always in Rob's appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's in Rob's appearance. So I had to always have my spidey senses up to get a sense of, is this the true Rob I know and love, or is this something automated, or is this something very powerful and oracle-like? I did decide to go ahead with the meeting. That morning, Chris and his brother contacted me and said, "Don't go to the meeting." Chris's brother's girlfriend was a renowned psychic, and she said that they had detected a very large craft over the Atlantic Ocean. But they very strongly warned me from going through with the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
I got the phone call the next day in Rob's voice saying, "We're calling for your answer. Are you going to work with us, or are we going to leave you to democracy?" And I didn't really want to agree to that. They put words in my mouth and said, "We'll come and see you tonight at such and such address." I thought it was a secret.
So they're giving you the address of this condo where you're allowed to stay. A friend saying, "Hey, you can stay here." Nobody knew where you were. And
Only
so,
my colleague knew, and the
right.
owner of the condo.
And didn't they make reference to the man you were seeing having dinner with that was super private? Nobody knew about that.
They made a joke after telling me, "Oh, we've been watching you all the way. We know what you eat for breakfast every morning at this diner at 53rd and Lex." They told me everywhere I had been, and then they said, "Hey, how's your broke-back boyfriend?"
Mm.
That really stunned me because nobody knew where I was. Nobody knew what apartment I was other than the condo owner and I don't even know if my colleague knew the condo number. I was given the keys and told where to go, and I was gratefully given protection by the doorman, being a high-rise building. I could not imagine how they knew that unless they had some advanced ways of knowing what people are doing or how to track them. But to know that Antonio had a bad back that night just floored me. I knew it wasn't your average surveillance techniques. It had to be far beyond what I could imagine technologically speaking. That night I went home, back to the condo. I spoke to the doorman and said, please don't let anyone in without screening them and calling up to me first. He said, you got it, miss. We won't let anybody in. Your secret's safe with us. I went into the elevator, and as I was ascending, the elevator car began to shake and move in ways I couldn't imagine. It was rattling, shaking from side to side, jerking, and then stopped short of the floor by about 4 feet. The elevator doors started flapping open and shut. I wanted off that elevator because I was afraid the thing was going to drop to the bottom of the shaft, and I was up in the 30s. If that elevator car dropped, I was a goner. As the elevator doors flapped open and shut, I realized I was going to have to leap through it, project myself upwards, and land on the floor and pull my legs out real fast, like someone getting ready to get into double Dutch jump rope. I managed to fling myself through the doors just as they opened and snapped shut again, got my legs out of the way before they shut on me, and I scrambled to my feet and ran down the hall. There was nobody around. I got into the condo and snapped all the deadbolt locks. There seemed to be 3 or 4 of them. So whoever lived there before was very security conscious. And I got in there and just went, oh my God, what happened? I've gotten through all of this only to fall down, potentially down an elevator shaft. I couldn't believe my luck that day. I was breathing hard. I was afraid. I was shaking. As I'm talking right now, I'm feeling some biological response to this. It's hard to tell this story still. I'm getting pretty adrenalized. I was very frightened because people do occasionally have elevator malfunctions that cause them to drop to their death. I felt as if I had just escaped death narrowly, and I was like, wow, what else? Another 30 seconds later, there's a soft knock on the door. I'm like, wait, they're not supposed to get up here without being announced. I look out the door and I see Rob's face softly smiling at me. I hear the voice say, hey, Lisa, it's 10. We're not going to hurt you.
And was the number of iterations that the walk-in ET would announce as, because after so many times you just stopped at 10.
We
10
stopped
was
at
his
10.
way of saying, this is not Rob, this is the hologram about to communicate with you.
Yes, it was required to always be announced. There was one period of time where I was being deceived and not getting the notification, but in general, it had to be announced who I was in the presence of. So if there was a finger snap, there would be an announcement. This is 10, or this is the Guardians. There was always urgency with them because they always said, we hardly ever deal with a human. You little made me feel very insignificant, but they held their missions and their duties to be above all else.
Mm-hmm.
I stood there deciding if I was going to open the door, and they said, hey, you don't have to open the door, but if you don't let us in, we can't help you. I did want to know. So I opened the door with great fear, and 10 walked in and crossed over to the sofa bed, which is folded up into the couch format, and sat down and said, come here, we're going to show you. And said he was shot in the head, took my hand, and I did not want my hand taken because I was afraid of being controlled. Opened my finger and took my finger and placed it in the left side of his head. He said, Rob was shot in the head. This is where he was shot. And my finger went into a hole that was slightly larger than a pencil. And my finger went about this deeply in. The skin was unbroken.
The skull was clearly indented or missing.
There was a hole. And I could not believe that I was feeling with my hand a hole in a skull. And if you're married to someone, you know their skull, you know the bumps on their head. You've been intimate with that person for about 15 years. You know them. And it began to dawn on me that something incomprehensible had occurred. And then took my finger and turned his head and put my hand on the other side. It was soft like a baby spontanelle where the skull is not closed up yet. It was squishy. And they said, this is the exit point. His skull was shattered on this side. It will take a while to heal. We can close up the skin very easily, but bone takes longer because it has to form. This is going to take a while. But I put my finger back in the hole and then back to the soft stuff. And I was very shocked to try to take in the realization that my hand was being given a guidance, a tour of his cranial injuries of a shooting death. And I was frozen with grief at the idea that he had met a fate like that. I was shocked because it was beyond comprehension. I was upset at everything that had occurred over the past couple days, where my attempts to hide had been completely futile. They knew everything about me, including what I ate. There was quite a bit of mental overload at that point. It was quite a bit to take in. And they said, all right, since you agreed to this, we have to go back to the apartment. You have to give us Rob's papers. And I said, I don't know about papers. And they said, we know where they are. So we have to go back down to the apartment. That's where we're going to do the regeneration. So we ended up leaving the condo, and I never did go back there again. We took a cab outside. The sky was a very odd peach color. It seemed to be about 40 degrees out, but there were very big, fat, puffy snowflakes coming down, which seemed abnormal. We took a cab from the Upper East Side down to the East Village, where we lived, and got back in the apartment, and it looked as if there had been a major cleanup happen. The futon was gone. All my sliced up clothes had been taken away because Rob had tried to provoke me by taking his hunting knife and cutting my clothes in half to get me to fight with him, which I didn't do. I had laid down and began to pray, and then he decided to. There had been a spaghetti splatter on the wall where he had thrown a dish during one of his prodromal rages, which would precede the seizures. The card table was gone. Our blanket was gone. It looked as if no one had lived there. And I asked them, where's the card table? And they said the democracy used that as a platform. They put his body on it and covered it with your blanket to haul him down the stairs and make it look like it was a moving project. I asked, where's the spaghetti stain? And they said, that's where they shot him. So they really cleaned up that wall good, didn't they? Mm-hmm. And it increased the sense of being stunned and overwhelmed. And being in the spot, you could feel the sense of a person's essence when you're at a place where something very violent has occurred or someone has lost their life. You can almost feel an aura of their essence, and it was very difficult to take in. It was very hard for me to feel emotion at the time because I was so fried from his rages and working so hard with one of the busiest entertainment groups in the world, which had been a 24/7 position.
Drained.
Really drained at the point of collapse. And they said, it's almost time for the regeneration event. They positioned me in a very specific spot on the floor because there was no furniture in the apartment. They told me to cover my eyes completely because the energy would blind me if I were to see it. I even had a little room for remaining skepticism, like, oh yeah, he's going to trick me. They said, during the event, you're going to feel a lot of energy. Don't move. Remember, don't uncover your eyes. And when it's over, you are going to be in the presence of a young Tomar. He will not use the name Rob. He will be infantile. And your agreement is that you will raise him for 20 months and get him assimilated into society. I didn't exactly feel like I had agreed to it, but I also didn't see what choice I had, given that democracy had shown quite a bit of power to surveil and to monitor and intimidate me on the streets and to look into our apartments from a position across the courtyard. And the phone having been tapped, I really felt like I needed an escape from that. And 20 more months of my life, it had been a very tough couple of years as he was becoming ill and there were fights about democracy and medical care. I'm almost in a bomb position. If you recall, maybe you're too young to have been taught how to position yourself in the event of a nuclear strike. But they taught us to get under our desks and shield our heads like this. We never knew that would do nothing. But that was what we had been taught. Someone put me in that position, and then in my mind's eye, it became very silent. There was a snap of a finger, and then this energy started to wave through my body that was so overwhelming. It almost knocked me over. I began to tip at one point, and I nearly lost my eye cover. It was so potent and powerful, rushing through my body in tidal waves as if I were being slammed by a tsunami. Something very overwhelming was overcoming me. I nearly passed out, and I could hear giant pulses of energy coming in. Wow, things I could hear. I didn't know if I was going to be able to remain conscious. And then suddenly it stopped, and I got more upright and got my balance. And then I hear this voice. It's Rob's voice, but it sounds like a little kid in Rob's voice going, "You're my grower-upper." I was afraid to look, but I realized the regeneration had occurred because the energy had dissipated. It was no longer overwhelming me. It was silent. And I slowly looked, and he was on the other side of the room, and he's hopping. And he said, "They made me from Rob, but I'm not Rob. I'm Tomar." And he was saying things like this, introducing himself or just letting me know, I'm not that bad man. I will never hurt you. I'm a nice boy, and you're my grower-upper, and I'm here now. The outcome to this, watching someone being so infantile, was very odd. Either the most unbelievable acting job ever.
But we need to clarify, he didn't just do this for a few hours. This went on, and you never saw a change in behavior and how long did this go on for?
It went on there was a gradual maturation process, but in the very beginning, he was very infantile. The first time the phone rang, and my phone would ring in the middle of the night, he was terrified. One time the phone rang. I don't recall if it was that night or the next night, but he ducked into the corner and tried to hide himself and was terrified by the telephone. And he was very puzzled by the television. There were quite a few things he seemed to know nothing about. He did have language. The guardians had said that he would have language. He would have some files so that he would know how to behave around people, but there were times he absolutely did not know how to behave around people. It was as if I had a toddler for quite a while, and I got used to the strange looks that I got from people if I went to the grocery store, and he'd be shuffling behind me, skipping and sometimes hopping, and, "Hey, Lisa, I want the candy bar." He didn't know that if I gave him $20 to buy a candy bar that he should get change. He just thought you give him the money and you get the candy bar. I had to explain to him about change. We went to the Red Apple grocery store one day, and I was off to the meat counter to pick up some chicken for dinner. I heard a big loud crash on the other side of the store. It turned out he had tackled the Smurfs lunchbox display because he was very excited that he had seen this merchandising stuff because he loved Smurfs. And I found him in the pile of lunchbox on the floor, and he's holding up the one he wants. Like, this one, I bought it for him, and he walked around with it like it was his briefcase. He never put anything in it, but he was so proud to walk around with it. And people would look at him like, what's with this guy? Is he a special person? And I had to get used to that. I occasionally would take him around. People got the feeling that something very odd was going on with us. And so I began to lead a very private life. Part of the agreement was that I would stay between my job and home so that they could assure my safety, because the papers they located in the apartment would be enough evidence to put away key people in democracy. So apparently Rob had been keeping records that the Guardians knew about. They found the records that he had that I didn't know about and said, all right, we're going to start to deal with democracy, and it'll take a while, but this will be what we need to do. So I had been assured protection so long as I stayed in one place or another. Tomar started to want to work and contribute to the household and show me that he was growing up. There was one point where he said that he started to buy me jewelry, gold and rubies and diamonds and emeralds. And I said, where are you getting this money from? And he said, oh, I have a job. I can pay bills now. And I said, what are you doing to get this money? And he said, oh, I just have to take guns to New Jersey. I was instantly very upset with him. His feelings were very hurt. He said, you used to always be mad at Rob because he didn't make money. And I said, you don't need to make money right now. You got to do something that you won't get in trouble for. You could go to jail for that. And he said, all right, I'll quit. But by then, I had a jewelry box of very expensive pieces of jewelry that he was bringing to please me. He said, I hope they don't get mad at me because I know what they're doing. I said, that's why you need to not be doing this. Don't ever work with anybody that's going to hurt you for quitting. By then, we were living back in Greenwich Village in a better space because I had gained quite a few raises and promotions at the job that I had because I was working very hard. I was making the bills much more easily then, but there were times I had to go to shows and be backstage and shake hands, and that was definitely part of the job that I had. One night I came back, I saw items from our refrigerator and kitchen on the ground, and I'm tiptoeing through this debris wondering what the heck happened. Recognizing things. And I get into the apartment building lobby, and the doorman says, you better get up there. Cops have been up. And I was like, what cops? I have no idea what I'm going to find in there. I went up there thinking maybe he'd been throwing stuff out the window, but why would you attract attention to yourself that way? So I got in the apartment, and there was blood all over the place. There was blood on the walls, blood in the bathroom. The cabinets in the kitchen had nearly been pulled off. The microwave was pretty well smashed. I found Tomar curled up under the bloody sheets in the bed. He was whimpering, and there was a giant gash on his forehead. I was mad because I thought maybe he had gotten into some trouble with the police. I said, what were you doing throwing stuff out the window? And he said, Lisa, I didn't do that. They did it to justify coming up here. That wasn't cops. If I did that, do you think I could get in a fight with them and they wouldn't take me away? It suddenly made sense that we had had invasion by some bad actors. And I began to feel as if things were going to go in the direction that Rob had gone. And suddenly I was no longer interested in being part of raising Tomar. He was
Mhm.
developed enough to get into stuff. He didn't know to have the sense yet to not get involved with certain kinds of things. I didn't want that kind of trouble back in my life, and I began to make a plan in my mind to withdraw from the whole setting. I did pretty well finish out the 20 months, but as soon as I reached that point in time, I decided that was going to be enough. I was going to let go of the lease, not renew it, and go live somewhere else. That was the beginning of deciding I had enough.
This is all important for framing this story. Could we fast forward? He eventually did pass away after you guys really weren't having much contact anymore. You're living in one place, he's living somewhere else. I do want to get to a conversation about disclosure. Could you explain how much longer did he last until he eventually passed away?
I last saw him in January of 1990. We were living at our own separate places, and somehow we managed to find out where I was moving to, and he moved directly across the street. I was so mad. But I started to have my own life and started to draw boundaries with him and said, hey, you're grown up enough now to have a job. He got a job in telemarketing. We had divided our pets between us, so I could visit the pets if I wanted. But by then I began a new relationship, and when he saw that I had moved on, he stopped coming around. So there was a period of years where nobody in the Barclay family or I knew where he was. I was very glad to have a new life without any contact with him or the guardians. About 5 years into my children's father's relationship, I got a call from people back at home that he was very ill and would pass away. I was sad about it, but I was asked not to show up in their life. There had been a very serious accident where he had a traumatic fall, whether it was a jump, a push, or an accident. We will never know. He apparently died a few times being rushed to the hospital. At that point, my brother Michael went to New York to try to find out what had happened to him. It was all very mysterious because he had said Michael had stopped at a police station to see what he could find out about it, and Tomar was very concerned about whether the police were asking him a lot of questions. We don't know if that might have been because of any remainder of democracy or whether it was considered a possible attempted murder, whether suicide. We will never know. It's possible during that point in time that because of the need for transfusions, he may have contracted AIDS. He was later diagnosed with AIDS. I hold space for the possibility that it may have been a neurological deterioration because, again, Rob had been ill. He told me that he had been diagnosed with AIDS, but it was the bucket diagnosis of the day, somewhat like fibromyalgia is used to diagnose things that they don't have a very good explanation for. It was largely neurological, and Rob had told me that he had myasthenia gravis, which is a breakdown of the neurological system. And now I know from things Lou Elizondo and others have said that there are potential very long-term harm from UFO exposure, and some of it seems similar to what Rob had been suffering when he had developed seizures. Stanford, as I understand it, was doing some research into the harms of UFO exposure.
That's
Gary Nolan's work. And I haven't heard if there's an outcome to it. At the time I was in the writing phase, I had heard that the government had asked him to do that work. It seems to me, when you think about disclosure, that if there are no UFOs, but they have enough impetus to ask a noted researcher to look into the harms of UFO exposure, there would be no need for that if there wasn't UFO exposure. That's a tell right there.
yes. Yeah, here we go. And then this brings up the conversation of disclosure. which is a huge topic right now. They've had a couple congressional hearings over the last year and a half with very high level people espousing this information that there are efforts to recover exotic craft that are not made by human hands. And they've recovered non-human biologics. Number one, are serious as a heart attack that this is going on. Number two, you look at the people that are saying this, and these are high-level people, scientists, military people, politicians. Now Congress has sunk their teeth into this. So it begs the question, what's going on here? And I'm of the opinion that this is the biggest open secret. It's been the biggest open secret for a long time, but because the story is so big and so vast and so fantastic, it will be very difficult to get the masses to buy into this. But for people that have been researching this, have shown an interest in this, it's not that far of a leap. And then your story is another piece of that puzzle. I think I just want to say one thing about your story. When you pick one or two things out of your story, it could easily be dismissed, right? But the problem is if you look at the work as a whole and you look from your story early in life and then later in life, there's
Like
multiple
30.
things that happen that are unexplainable, that weave this sort of web of paranormal UFO activity. It begins to look like, okay, something is definitely happening here. Let me ask you this question, Lisa. Since we're talking about disclosure, what do you make of the testimony of David Grush when he says these things that are very shocking? How do you see that affecting the public consciousness?
I feel it's a ripple process, and the way the Guardians had described it is that they literally said, we leave evidence in drips and drabs, and we are letting it filter into the awareness of your people. But at the time that this was occurring, which was from about 1975 to close to 1990, the last time I saw Tomar, they were being very conscious of how much they were letting flow through. They said that they were doing it in different ways by encouraging music to cover certain topics. We had David Bowie being Major Tom. We had Yes, we had Uriah Heep. We had many major recording artists who were singing about otherworldly things. And there still wasn't that much about UFOs available. And we were being transported into these worlds of contemplation of, there are these other places, not just us. The Guardians did say that they would leave debris. They would leave information to be taken in, and that it was being done at a certain pace. And I wonder if what's going on in December of 2024 mightn't be a bigger statement. And I wonder if what's happening in the skies, either it's a very big effort involving a tremendous amount of money and coordination, and it has to be an organization that wants something because they are picking out locations near military sites. Whoever's doing it has an interest. And what we're doing, I have had the feeling that maybe the beings will take care of disclosure for us. I have had strong feelings that just because we don't know that they're for us doesn't mean they're against us. We need to have an open space for, are they benign? Are they actually helping us in ways that we won't do for ourselves? It doesn't have to be a black and white enemy threat, or they're definitely our friends. We have no way to ascertain that. So that throws everyone who makes an appearance on our planet immediately into the threat category. One thing about this story is that there was a conscious effort to unbalance the Cold War. The amount of data that appears in certain areas matches the activities they were talking to me about. At the time I was writing this story, living these experiences, Chicago was a highly anomalous area. I've actually wondered if Lake Michigan might be a great place for them to hang out. You can't see halfway across Lake Michigan.
Mhm.
If they have the technology to tell air traffic control that it sees a commercial flight when it's really a craft that wants to fly low and
Mhm.
overhead, and they have the technology to tell the human mind, you see a regular airplane, then they can be active in our world and work in our benefit, but without getting us too freaked out. And
Mhm.
I think they have a pretty good gauge on how ready society is. There's a lot of hubris in the human race. We think we're so it.
Mhm.
And I think one thing that's interesting about this story is the number of things that pertain to invisibility, our ability to see, the spectrum through which we can see. They work at higher spectrums. And at the time, cell phone, when we had landlines, we didn't really think a lot about phone calls going through the air. Well, now we
Mhm.
take it for granted. Why wouldn't technology also go through the air?
Mhm.
If you're a higher level being, then you probably have a collective conscience. And if you think about what the Guardians, they always spoke in plural. It
Mhm.
was never I, it was always we. That
Mhm.
means they have a very advanced consciousness.
Mhm.
And that means they are operating at a level of connectedness, which means their technology may be very subtle energy beyond anything that we can measure, too high and too fine a vibration.
Mhm. And I wonder, obviously, we're at a point now technologically where we can draw some parallels and we can thread the needle where we could see our technology is going. And so when you say these things today in 2024, people can wrap their head around that. You have these conversations in 1964, 1974, there's no frame of reference. It's the same thing as if you show a UFO in the 1600s, they have no frame of reference. The next closest thing is a bird in the skies. They don't have that frame of reference. We've had this explosion of technology in the last 100 years that gives us these data points to where you can say, oh, they're putting something in front of us. Can we recognize what that could be, or at least have some general idea? And I think the answer is yes now. So maybe that's part of the acceleration of awareness. Maybe we're not alone in the universe. Maybe we're not alone here on this planet. I
I don't
think
think so.
I think there's plenty of evidence to support that we're not. People need to get past this, are we alone or not? So we can then get to the question, what are they doing? I don't think it's a matter of are they here, are they not here? The conversation needs to be accelerated. What are they doing here? What would be the intent? Those questions need to start coming. It needs to get past this point of are UFOs real? What's
Yeah,
really
we're
going on in the
stuck
government?
on that.
We got to get past that and start having a higher level conversation, in my opinion. I know a lot of people aren't there yet.
If you
It,
see one, then you're a believer or
and,
not with
and,
your senses.
I'll say this. I've been looking into this for almost 20 years now, since YouTube launched in 2005. This was not even anything I was interested in. I was in my mid 20s, not even a blip in my radar. But when I first came across YouTube, it was inundated with these types of videos. Lots of them were fake, but then I came across interviews and my world just went from basically this to like this. And I was like, well, what is this? It started me on this path of insane curiosity of what the heck is going on here? I've never seen anything anomalous. I've been looking at this for 20 years, and I think I have a pretty good understanding of what this is. I think. I'm sure I don't, but I like to think I do. Because I've never seen something, there's still that part of my brain that wants to protect me and say, be careful. But if you just look at the data, there's so much data to support that there's something very strange going on here. So, yeah, I think a big showing of something undeniable takes everybody and fully pushes them across the finish line. And maybe that's what's going on now with these drone sightings. Maybe it's just to raise awareness a little bit more to where it tips the needle.
Think about when the fire of curiosity lit for you. You may have been urged along.
The internet did not hurt that process at all because information became so accessible. I was not a voracious reader when I was a kid. I was into athletics, even though tons of information was available. When the internet came about, it became so easy to look up anything you were interested in. And that process, I think, really sparked, because I think my mind works. I get very distracted. I'll think about this, then I'll think about that. And instantaneous information made the ability for me to absorb really quickly. When I latch on to things, I latch on hard. I loved sci-fi. I thought the coolest types of movies were like that. You never thought that anything like that realm could even exist at all because it was all fantasy. But then when you start to realize, you start seeing these very serious people taking this seriously, you're like, whoa, wait a second here. Is there something going on with this? And that was enough to keep me going. So yeah, the seeds of curiosity are potent. Lisa, this was a really great, fantastic conversation. I want to thank you for your time and
Thank you,
your
Matt.
honesty in your book. I highly recommend everybody go read it with an open mind and see what you think. It's the Earth's Secret Visitors. I'll put links for all your stuff in the description.
Thank you so much.
All right,
I really
thank you
enjoyed our
so much.
conversation.
Absolutely. Bye, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.